Alright, the Asus ROG Swift PG27AQDP. If you want to check out this exact same monitor, there's Amazon links below for the US, UK, Canada, and international links, but let's talk about it. Firstly, this is a 27-inch screen size with a 1440p resolution, and this is a W-OLED manufactured by LG. Now, like the other W-OLEDs that we've seen, this does have that matte finish. Now, it still does cause that dirty screen effect, especially on the whites. Some people may not mind the matte finish, and I think actually some people prefer it, but this does significantly reduce overall clarity, visual contrast ratio. Even though this is an OLED, the visual contrast ratio is significantly reduced, and also the vibrancy of colors, along with, well, a lot of other things. However, this monitor has a 480Hz refresh rate, so you may be buying this as a competitive gaming monitor, which is totally legitimate. This has FreeSync Premium and is NVIDIA certified G-Sync compatible, and this works with HDR with variable refresh rate, and it works flawlessly whether you're in SDR or HDR. For ports, this has one DisplayPort 1.4, two HDMI 2.1s, a USB Type-B upstream, and then two USB Type-A 3.2 downstreams. This also has a 3.5mm audio out, which is a good thing, because those seem to be going away in the gaming monitors, which I don't like. But with that, let's get into the meat and potatoes: brightness. Brightness here fluctuates wildly. Now, this is what's called ABL. Depending on what is on your screen, whether it's darker or lighter, the screen will adjust brightness depending on that. Now, LG W-OLEDs typically do this a lot more intensely than the QD OLEDs, but there are a few things you can do to mitigate this, as well as increase the overall screen brightness, as, well, these W-OLEDs tend to be fairly dim, but this one actually does a pretty dang good job. Now, in the OLED care section of the menu system, you can turn off two settings. One of them is auto logo brightness, and the other is outer dimming control. Now, this does significantly increase, for the first one, overall screen brightness. Well, maybe not significantly, but definitely noticeably. And then the outer dimming control does a significant amount around the edges of the screen. I highly recommend it. The image looks way more vibrant and beautiful if you do that. Now, because of how wildly this monitor fluctuates its brightness, it was very hard to get an accurate reading. So this went from like a low in the whites, obviously testing screen brightness with whites, this went to a low of 220 nits, but all the way up to 400 nits. That's not just in the highlights, so that's pretty impressive. Most of the time you're gonna be in the 350 nit range, and that's if there are darker colors on the screen. So if you're like doing a game, 350 nits, again, that's if you turn auto logo brightness and outer dimming control off. That's solid, like really, that's solid. The negative here though is if you're doing like productivity work and it's mainly like a white screen, if you're scrolling on YouTube, if you're writing notes, it gets really dim, like too dim, where it's kind of hard to see the display if you're using it in the daytime. However, the good part about this is if you're gaming, have stuff like this on the screen, this part is getting really, really bright right now. This Asus version of the LG panel is much better than I think LG's implementations, I think in most ways, which is actually the same thing we saw with Samsung's QD OLED panels, but, well, Asusified. Now, HDR does bump the overall screen brightness. However, the colors are pretty substantially undersaturated regardless of which HDR mode you're in. And even with the HDR adjustable mode, most of the settings here are locked, unlike the Asus XG27AQDP, which is a QD OLED panel. Most of those were completely unlocked. You can do so much to adjust your actual HDR experience, well beyond just saturation, but here saturation is locked. Basically, all you can adjust is brightness from 90 to 100, and there's not really many other settings you can adjust, so that's kind of a bummer. Because even though this is an OLED and you want to use it in HDR, the HDR does not look as good as SDR. Now, I did put this through the Windows HDR calibrator, and you just take that saturation, pull it all the way up at the end step there. And if you guys don't know, totally free software. If you have Windows 11, it's very easy, it takes 45 seconds. If you get this monitor, highly recommend doing that for HDR. It makes the HDR experience significantly better, but still, it does not saturate those colors quite enough. Now, you could probably fairly easily modify that, download a software that can just boost your saturation up a little bit. You might even be able to do it in Windows itself, but out of the box, you are gonna have to tune it Otherwise, SDR looks significantly better. Now, an interesting note with the W-OLEDs when compared to the QD-OLEDs is that the QD-OLEDs get significantly hotter, and these W-OLEDs really don't get that hot at all. The XG27AQDP, which is a QD OLED, and then this monitor, which obviously is a W-OLED, have basically the same back panel design, but the QD OLED has way more cooling in the back, like open vents everywhere, and this barely has any. I was a little bit worried at first, but this thing, like, it's been running for a really long time. It's warm, but the QD OLED gets hot. Nothing really concerned for either, but just an interesting note. All right, but let's talk colors. Color coverage is enormous here, covering over 99% of the DCI-P3 color gamut. Accuracy out of the box was nothing amazing. The different picture modes they call game visuals were completely wonked the heck out. And that was the same on the XG27AQDP. I left this in the user mode most of the time, and that's really what I'd recommend because the other ones are completely wonked out. HDR was the most color accurate out of the box, but again, it was pretty significantly undersaturated, so yeah. This is also able to output 10 bits of color at its full 480Hz and 1440p, which is great. Let's talk text clarity. The W-OLEDs have a much bigger problem with text clarity than the QD OLEDs, especially the Gen 3 panels of the QD OLEDs. This is no different on this panel. It's very significant. Smaller and medium-sized text, especially medium-sized and bold text, really is very hard to read, especially from a typical viewing distance. It obviously gets kind of better the further you go back, and the closer you get, the more apparent the red and green separation of the text gets. This is because of the subpixel layout. Now, you can do things to adjust this, and Asus has a mode called Vivid Pixel, which I tried using. It doesn't really do much for this. It's just so bad that it can't really fix anything. Now, these monitors, the W-OLEDs, really most of them that I've used, I really wouldn't recommend them for productivity or professional photo video editing, unless you're going to either remove the matte finish or do something to make it glossy, which it's a very expensive monitor to take that chance if that's your first time, so would not recommend that if you guys are thinking, oh, that's a good, just get a QD OLED. The reason I say that is the dirty screen effect really would not be good for any sort of professional photo video editing, as well as the text clarity would just be a big problem. You wouldn't literally accurately be able to see what you're doing. So for stuff like video editing, you can do it, but really, I don't think there's any reason to not just get a QD OLED if you want to edit on an OLED, or forget OLEDs and just get an IPS for doing that. Just wouldn't recommend this. Also, for writing papers, again, you can do it, but it's a significantly worse experience than even a $200 VA panel for doing that, just because of the text clarity problems and the really intense dirty screen effect that you get on whites. That's, again, when you're doing stuff like writing papers, it's super intense. Now, in game, you don't really notice the dirty screen effect in the colors as much. You definitely notice the difference between the clarity, but that's only if you're coming from a glossy finish monitor. However, in game, you will still notice the dirty screen effect in something like the clouds, but with that, let's move on to response time, ghosting, and gameplay experience. Ghosting here is just about as perfect as it's gonna get. It's basically instantaneous. You pair that with 480Hz, and well, you're getting a dang good monitor. If you want something for competitive gaming, well, it's really gonna be hard to get better than this, especially when you're focused 100% on speed. This is a good monitor. Now, the gameplay experience here is really the thing that changed my mind on what I thought this monitor was gonna be like. You guys know I despise taking a monitor like this that is so capable of looking absolutely stunning and ruining it for absolutely no reason by putting that matte finish on it. However, I also realized while gaming on this, if speed is everything to you, 480Hz at a 1440p resolution, which I think is pretty good because no one's gonna be running 480Hz at 4K, so that makes sense. If you are just looking at this from a perspective of really amazing, awesome speed for highly competitive games, this was a phenomenal monitor to game on. While I would have preferred it to be glossy, as it's not as beautiful as it could have been in-game, this is still a pretty monitor. It's a very pretty monitor. And to have this amount of performance and still get decent beauty for sure, it's still very pretty and awesome blacks, I mean, this is solid. However, if you're looking for very, very, very good speed and also beauty as well, you want them equal, then you get the QD OLEDs, and that's me. Like, that's what I would buy, but I understand that I'm not everyone, and that's not what everyone wants. With that, let's talk console compatibility. If you want to game on PC and then plug your console in, how does it do? Well, it does great. This is fully compatible with the PS5 and Xbox Series X and S, able to downscale a 4K 120Hz signal with HDR and variable refresh rate on at the same time, or you can get 1440p at 120Hz with variable refresh rate and HDR only on the PS5, so no HDR on the Xboxes. The Xbox doesn't allow you to do HDR in anything other than 4K, so that's not the monitor's fault. But yeah, that's great. If you want to use your console with it, go right ahead. Now, for stand and build quality, for the most part, this feels premium, but for the most part. The bottom part of the stand is made of a thick metal with a cool red gobo that projects onto your desk. Look at how cool it looks, and it's insanely bright. Like, even at the lowest setting, which it's on right now, it's literally insanely bright. Yeah, that's the lowest level. You can turn it off. It's off, but then this is level 1 and 2 and 3. Check it out. That's bright. That's real bright. Oh, that was only level 2. Okay, check this. Boom. Level 3. That thing is bright. It's kind of cool, but I do wish that it could be like RGB to match your setup. As you see, I'm doing like a rainbow puke here, and it's red. So yeah, but it does look sick, and it's very bright, and that's cool. Now, for the stand's adjustability, it's great. You have height, tilt, swivel, and full rotation going both to the left as well as to the right. And that's great, but obviously, for the price point, this is a clip-in stand, which means you just like put the stand in and it clips right in. However, this thing has some serious play on that like clip-in part, which is really weird. Like, if I just go back here and touch it, like that's some serious play. Maybe that was a quality control issue, but that really should not happen at this price point. For the menu system and controls, the controls are great here. It has a little bump out that makes getting to the joystick and those two other buttons, which is power as well as your AI assistant, super, super easy. It's really great placement. The only thing that annoys me is that on the XG27AQDP, it has that same bump out, but the logo here has a bright spot, like a clearly very bright spot at the top of it, and then every other part is dim, whereas on the XG27AQDP, that whole logo was like perfectly lit. Why? It's like the same, it's so strange. Like, that stuff is just so strange to me. Nitpick, for sure, nitpick, yes. The menu system itself is easy to navigate without any real learning curve, and I really do like all the settings you can adjust, including all the OLED care settings that do happen to increase the brightness significantly, which is great. However, I do wish they allowed more control over the HDR adjustability setting like they did on the XG27. For Vesa compatibility, it is compatible with 100mm by 100mm Vesa mounts, and it uses a clip-in stand to hop in with the 100mm Vesa mount. You guys know what I'm saying. It's freaking cool though. That is cool. And that one, like that piece, is nice and stiff. It just, that's not. All right, but moving on to the most important section of the video, price and value, and should you buy this? Coming in at a $999.99 price point, a basically $1,000 monitor. For that money, you are getting one of the fastest gaming monitors available with a 480Hz refresh rate and OLED ghosting performance, which is impeccable. There's also an ultra low motion blur setting, which decreases the brightness significantly, but if you want the absolute best motion clarity, that's gonna give it to you. However, you are sacrificing the full visual beauty that's capable of an OLED due to the thick matte finish, and the undersaturated HDR mode, well, it will need some sort of messing around and playing around to fix. But if speed is your primary objective, with beauty being a nice bonus, then this monitor could be a really good monitor for you if you're either loaded or it goes on sale, because this thing is not cheap. But again, if you want to check out this exact same monitor, there's Amazon links below for the US, UK, Canada, and international links. And if you want to check out my review of the XG27AQDP, which is the QD OLED, 27-inch, 1440p, 360Hz, beautiful monitor because of a glossy finish, well, that video is right here, or maybe it's right here. Yeah, I don't know. One of those. It's one of these. This is Type C Tech Reviews, and I'll see you guys in the next video.